First of all, I want to thank Mr. Mark Donfrey for inviting me to participate in this conference about peace building and conflict resolution. To start my speech, it's important to bear in mind the relationships about the existing in the economic literature about the importance of religious diversity, religious polarization, and civil or social conflict. I'm going to try to examine these relations between religious polarization and civil conflict using the empirical evidence and the main conclusion obtained during over the last years in the economic analysis. This topic is relevant due to the current conflicts throughout the world, which drive us to wonder if they are seemingly determined by religious polarization. The economic literature on this field is not very extensive, but is quite intensive over the last 2 decades. We measure conflict by means of an index of social unrest. This measure of conflict is a linear combination of 8 different manifestations of domestic conflicts. First, assassinations. Second, general strikes, guerrilla warfare, major government crises, purges, riots, revolutions, and anti-government demonstrations. We will take the value of this continuous variable of the conflicts throughout the world as a dependent variable. In order to assess the importance of religious interactions and potential conflict within a country, we could construct 2 basic measures. The first one would be an index of religious fragmentation that can be interpreted as the probability that 2 individuals in a country will belong to different religious groups. Therefore, fragmentation increases when the number of groups increment. A second index is the index of polarization that ranges from 0 to 1 and reaches a maximum 1 when there are 2 religious groups of equal size. In this type of index, what matters is not only many groups, how many groups there are, but also if they view other groups as a potential threat for their interests. For a given number of groups, the threat is higher the larger the size of another group relative to the size of the reference group is higher again. It's proven that polarization, is proven statistically, it's proven that polarization index depends on interpersonal distances among people and the intensity of feelings, such as the interpersonal antagonism. This is the result of the sense of identification with one's group and the alienation felt towards members of other groups. According to the current research, what matters for conflict is not the cultural differences, but the way these differences are perceived, are liked or disliked by the different groups. Another interesting dimension to explore is the effect of polarization on the probability of the onset of a civil conflict, because once a conflict has started, the probability that it continues is much higher than the one conflict onset. Thus, it seems unreasonable to explain both onset and incidence, since phenomena will probably have different causes. That say, different causes of the probability of the probability of happening a conflict is different before or after the onset of the conflict. The results strongly support the hypothesis that the polarization indices that incorporate intensity or religious and ethnic feelings are highly significant and explanatory of civil conflicts. As is was expected, religious polarization has a negative effect on investment, human capital, economic growth, income per capita, and eventually social unrest and conflict. In few words, it was found by this statistical analysis that while religion's fractionalization significantly reduces conflict, religious polarization increases it. One relevant question at that point is wondering about does religious diversity affect the probability of civil conflict? If we take the views of political scientists like Samuel Huntington, which proposes that people's cultural and religious identities will be the primary source of conflict in the post-Cold War period, the answer is rather yes. But surprisingly, the few studies that try to empirically answer this question suggest otherwise. Religious intolerance is a significant and robust predictor of conflict. The issue of religious intolerance has been entirely ignored in the literature, at least in the economic literature. In order to construct measures of religious intolerance, we took into account three different broad level indices which are related to religious intolerance. The first one was so-called government regulation index, which takes into account factors such as proselytizing in public, preaching, or conversion. When it's limited or restricted, the index is low. The second index is the social regulation index, which takes into account factors such as if established or existing religions try to shut out other religions in any way. And the third index is the so-called government favoritism index, which takes into account factors such as what is the balance of government funding. The most, I'm gonna synthesize a bit my speech. So it's possible to see that government social regulation of religion and both social and regulation indices are significantly correlate with civil conflicts and lead to more conflicts. The result is not surprising, since government and social regulation of religion are arguably more fundamental types of intolerance, since they relate to the more fundamental right of freedom of religion, while government favoritism is less so. Additionally, it is noticeable that, as expected, religious intolerance is negatively correlated with religious diversity. Some economists argue that conditional on a given degree of polarization, more religious diversity decreases the probability of civil war or of a civil conflict, because a high number of different groups increase, in fact, the coordination problems, and therefore, given a level of polarization, the probability of civil war may be smaller. We would like, on the other side, to verify whether some religions are more conflict-prone or peace-loving than others. And the empirical evidence shows that, first, there is no evidence whatsoever of some religions being more violent than others, or that being religious by itself makes country more or less violent. Second, it's possible to verify that the current combination of religions that leads to more diversity matter, and does matter. More importantly, the intolerance of the government and society of a country is more relevant for conflict than the presence of any particular religion. Third, societies that are more relevant towards other religions are likely to sustain more religions, experience more religious diversity, and less civil conflict. So we are to say something about the effects of religious diversity on civil conflict. We must take into account how tolerant the society is. We have taken two recent experiences, one much more recent than the other. The first one is the Bosnian experience, and the second one is the Middle East experience. According to the Bosnian experience, we could say that the Dayton Agreement ended the war, but despite too many positive achievements, had failed so far to provide a basis for a viable future, because it has mainly focused on the material dimension of reconstruction and recovery promotion, but is insufficient in terms of conflict transformation and the elimination of the sources of war. An adequate model for coexistence of the different communities is needed. On the Middle East, just in the newspapers over the last weeks, especially since June the 10th, when the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant conquered Mosul, the second city of Iraq, and began their march towards Baghdad. The ghost of civil war returned. Baghdad fears the confessional conflict. The offensive from Sunnis has awakened to Shia militias. The policy of the Iraqi government pointing to the marginalization of the Sunni community is one of the causes of the insurrection. And the loneliness of Maliki is compensated for the unity among the Shia set that represent the 60% of the population. And the Iraqi government has to urgently adopt policies that reconcile Sunni and Shia communities. It's not as easy as I already said. In fact, in the Middle East, one fundamental factor of conflict is polarization and sectarianism between Shiites and Sunnis. The Sunni countries believe that the Iranian Revolution of the 1979 designed a religious project against the prevailing nationalist project in the Arab world, and with the American invasion, Iraq remains under the Iranian orbit and causes the persecution of the Sunni minority. In the Middle East is actually happening a Cold War between Iran with its allies and Saudi Arabia with its own allies. The war in Syria, which was launched looking for greater political openness and better living conditions, has become a sectarian conflict driven by power interests or energy interests. And has become a sectarian conflict between Iran, Iraq, Hezbollah, al-Assad, with the support of Russia and China, driven by their own interests, on the one hand, and Turkey, the countries of the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and the EU, which supports the rebels on the other. In the Syrian conflicts, the Syrian conflict is not resolved. Stability in the entire area and borders designed after the First World War by France and the United Kingdom could be at serious risk. The main conclusions of the final remarks are very clear, are two: polarization and tolerance are the key drivers of conflicts, and inclusion, understanding, and tolerance are key drivers of political stability, democracy, and peace. The history started when the appointment of the four caliph, cousin of Muhammad, of the Prophet. This appointment resulted in a schism between the Orthodox, the Sunnis. They are 80% of the Muslim population, and the heterodox Shias, 15%. So there are the two large branches which distribute the Arabic believers well. So, since then, the Shia minority presented an ideological and political opposition to the central power of obedience, the Sunni obedience, and that arise to our times. up to today. So it's only possible to put an end to this violent confrontation through a historic compromise between the two, but the prospect that any of these schisms softens in the short or to medium term are unfortunately very, very grim. It's a bit sad, but it's the reality.